On August 14, 2021, Christopher Harvey dialed 911 from the home he shared with his ex-girlfriend, Rodrica Hill. He claimed that he just got home and found his girlfriend gravely injured, and that the back door of the home had been left open. The evidence, however, painted a very different picture. According to the evidence, Christopher Harvey was not happy with the breakup, and he was not happy that Rodrica started seeing someone else. The state eventually charged Christopher Harvey with Rodrica Hill's murder, claiming that he murdered the young mother due to jealousy. His interrogation has gained popularity due to his commitment to the story that someone else did it, although he admitted that he was mad at Rodrica because she had brought her new man to their home. So this is Christopher Harvey's trial for the murder of ex-girlfriend Rodrica Hill. Representing the state are prosecutors Brittany Fox and Andrea Diaz. Representing the defendant, Christopher Harvey, are Assistant Public Defenders Brooke Brewer, Amy Lim, and Dina Duncan. At his interrogation, Christopher Harvey seemed unhinged, and his defense story seemed implausible. Let's see if he has a better defense at trial, with the help of 3 members of the excellent local public defender's office.
All right. Get that session. I'll take that.
All right, good morning. Please be seated.
Okay.
Did you do that? Did you point it up like that? Or?
I thought it was like that.
I don't think I did it.
I thought they preferred it.
Are we ready to go on the record?
Yes, sir.
All right, so this is 2021 CF 2146, State of Florida versus Christopher Harvey. The defendant is present in the courtroom. All counsel are present. Anything before we bring the jury back in?
I just wanted the chance to get some exhibits to put them on the witness stand to save some time for Ms. Hyatt.
You go ahead. Please be seated and state your next witness.
State calls Maria Hyatt.
Good morning, ma'am. Can I get you to place your stuff down there for a moment and then come back here to face our clerk and be sworn? Over here.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, then just have a seat there. And stay when you're ready.
Good morning. Can you please introduce yourself and spell your name?
Hi, good morning. My name is Maria Hyatt, and my last name is spelled Hiott.
How are you employed?
I'm currently employed with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement in the biology section as a crime laboratory analyst.
What does the biology section analyze?
So we analyze any items of evidence that come in from a possible crime, and I take samples from the item of evidence to see who could have contributed their DNA to the item of evidence. I also look at what we call buccal swabs or standards from specific individuals that may have been involved and compare their DNA to the DNA from the items of evidence to see if they could have or could not have contributed their DNA to the items of evidence.
Could you give the jury an idea of your educational background and training that allows you to be a DNA analyst?
Yes. I have a Bachelor's of Science from the University of Central Florida with a concentration in biology forensic science. At the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, which I'll refer to as FDLE, I went through a 1.5-year training program that consisted of 2 parts. The first part consisted of journal article readings, scientific journal article readings on the subject matter, doing samples on, doing the same chemical procedures that I do on actual evidence on mock samples, and then going through written tests and oral examinations to make sure that I understand the subject matter. The second half consisted of a 20-case file project where I worked with an analyst on real casework. And finally, I did a mock trial, which was all successfully completed.
How long have you been a DNA analyst with FDLE?
I have been a DNA analyst since September of 2017, and I have been on the bench, so when I finished my training, since May of 2019.
How many specimens would you say you've analyzed for the presence or absence of DNA in your career?
That is very hard to say. I know that it's definitely in the hundreds, if not starting to get into the thousands.
And have you had the occasion to testify about your findings in court?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
About 10 times.
Is FDLE an accredited lab?
Yes, it is.
And what about the biology section within FDLE?
Yes, the biology section is not only accredited with the whole laboratory as a whole, but we are also accredited to the standards from the FBI through their quality assurance standards.
Okay. Do you have to do anything to maintain accreditation each year?
Yes. So each year we go through an audit. Depending on what year it is, it might be an internal audit or an external audit. So people from within our laboratory or people from outside our laboratory sections. And then once every 4 years, we have to go through a big accreditation cycle where they go through all of our records by ANAB, which stands for the American National Standards Institute. I'm sorry, that is incorrect. The American National Standards Institute National Accrediting Board. So sorry about that. And so every 4 years we go through a big accreditation cycle where they go through all of our paperwork and ensure that we have been following not only our standard operating procedures and policies, but also the policies that they have set forth.
Right. And what about individual proficiency testing?
So in the biology section, we each go through, each of the analysts go through individual proficiency testing twice a year. And the proficiency test is basically a mock case file. When it comes in, we know it is a mock case file, but it is treated exactly like any case that we work. At the end of the testing, once I submit my test results, the accreditation body goes through and analyzes all of the results that have been obtained. Those results are then sent over to my supervisor, and she determines if I have passed or not.
And have you completed successfully all of your proficiency testing?
Yes, I have.
Was FDLE an accredited laboratory, including the DNA section, when you did the analysis in this case?
Yes, it was.
And has it maintained its accreditation?
Yes, we have.
Can you explain to the jury what DNA is?
Yes. Excuse me. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is basically the building blocks of what makes a human, or what makes you, you. It codes for things like your eye color, how many fingers you have, your hair color, and other things like that. Additionally, the DNA that you have gets passed down from your parents to you. And it is individual, it is unique to each individual with the exception of identical siblings.
Let me ask you.
Yes. Sorry.
No, that's okay. So as it relates to DNA, is there a specific scientific method that is used to extract DNA and to compare DNA?
Yes. So whenever I have a sample and I take that sample, I add specific chemicals to the sample that is in an individually labeled tube. I apply heat, and then that DNA comes out into the solution. I then take it on through the next steps of my DNA testing process, where I can see how much DNA is present. If there is enough DNA for me to take it on, then I take it through the next step, where I make millions of copies of specific areas of the DNA that I am looking for. Finally, it goes through a detection instrument where it detects all of those DNA particles that I have made copies of. I then look at it on my computer, and it comes out on a graph, and it looks like just peaks on the graph, and then I interpret that. Once I've finished my interpretations and determine if someone could have contributed their DNA to that specific sample, I calculate statistics to show the weight of that inclusion or that match, and then I report my findings as well.
Is that process that you've laid out generally accepted in the scientific community for the field of DNA analysis?
Yes, it is.
Has it been for some time?
Yes, it has.
Do you know how long?
Approximately since the early 90s.
1990s?
Yes.
I tender the witness.
Any objection?
No questions, Judge.
All right, the court will accept them.
Okay.
Go ahead, State.
I'd like to direct your attention to specifically the analysis you performed in this case. That comprised of 2 separate reports. Right. So I'm going to kind of pull from both, but try to keep you organized. Did you obtain 3 separate individuals' buccal swabs?
Yes, I did.
Right. And I believe States Exhibit 15, 30, 31, and 36A and B are in front of you.
You said 15, 36A, and?
36B, and then 30 and 31.
Yes, they are in front of me.
All right. Or 30 and 31 buccal swabs from the same individual, just they're in separate packaging, I guess.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Yes.
Let's start with 30 and 31. We can take a
Okay.
look at that. Do you recognize States 30 and 31?
Yes, I do. I recognize it by my individual FDLE barcode, as well as my date and initials on the item, and specifically on this one, my seals. The same thing on here, except I did not open this one, so there's no seals on this one, or my seals at least.
And what are 30 and 31 stated, who are they stated to be from?
They are stated to be right and left buccal swabs, left and right buccal swabs, respectively, from Rodrica Hill, excuse me.
Okay. If you could also take a look at States 29, which I believe is in front of you as well.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me if you recognize States 29, and if so, how?
Yes, I do recognize it again. I have my individual unique yellow barcode, as well as my dated initials and my initials on my seal at the bottom here.
And what is States 29?
States 29, it is a sex assault kit that was taken from Ms. Hill.
So I want to start with States 29. When you receive a piece of evidence, how do you make sure that it hasn't been tampered with and that it's in a sufficient condition to start analysis on?
So prior to me starting my analysis, I ensure that the item is not open in any way and that the seals from the agency have not been tampered with. So that would be typically the seals on the top here.
And that you have in your hand is a sexual assault kit. Is that standard in the industry? It looks like it has FDLE's markings on it.
Yes, so FDLE actually has a company that makes the kits available and ready for the agencies that need to use it.
And it's a big white bag. What's inside the bag?
So the FDLE sex assault kit, when it's produced, it contains, inside of this giant bag, it contains smaller little bags that are labeled specifically for different areas that might be sampled during a sex assault kit event. Typically there is what we call a buccal swab or a standard. So a buccal swab is just the swab from the inside of a cheek. And then there also could be swabs from the private regions, like a vaginal swab, an anal swab, an oral swab, and then any swabs from hands or fingernails potentially could also be in here.
Are they each individually packaged to ensure that there's no cross-contamination or anything like that?
Yes, typically, so what we provide in the kit is the envelopes, and inside of each envelope there is a little swab wrapper, so that contains sometimes one, sometimes two swabs. So a swab, you can just think of it as a long Q-tip. And then inside of there, we also provide little seals, so similar to this, that the agency or whoever's collecting the items of evidence could then seal that specific package so that we know it's not tampered with.
Okay. And when you received 29, were all the seals, 29, were all the seals intact and there didn't appear to be any signs of it being tampered with?
Let me go ahead and double check. They all appear to be sealed, correct,
Okay.
and not tampered with.
Can you tell the jury what swabs specifically you received in states 29?
So in the sexual assault evidence kit from Rodrica Hill, just going to say Miss Hill from now on, I had a vaginal swab, an anal swab, an oral swab, swabs from her thigh area, breasts, and neck swabs. Additionally, I believe this kit was taken by the medical examiner's office, and they took samples from the pubic hair combings, but they also took pulled head hair samples and pulled pubic hair samples that could have been used as a standard.
And when you say standard, can you remind us again of what that means?
Yes, so a standard is just a known sample that is coming from a specific individual. Typically, we do a buccal swab because we have a lot of cells, DNA cells, concentrated in the cheek, and so it's very easy and not painful to take that swab. But we can also get a standard from possible hair or just a swab of specific area on the skin. But typically, it's a buccal swab.
Okay. When you receive items of evidence, do you work on all of them together? Can you give the jury an idea of how you prevent from cross-contamination?
Mm-hmm. When I receive items of evidence, especially in cases where there's many items of evidence, I clean the area individually, not individually, each time that I'm working an item of evidence. So I only ever have one item of evidence open at a time. As I'm taking my samples from the items of evidence, I will also only have one tube open at a time. And that tube, as soon as I put my sample in the tube, I will label it with a specific unique identifying label. Once I am done examining the entire item or piece of evidence, I will then go ahead and clean all of my area and all of my utensils. We typically try to use disposable utensils when possible, but if it is not possible, I'll go ahead and clean those utensils as well. So for example, scissors. So I'll make sure that the entire area is clean before I move on to the next item of evidence. And typically the way that I work my evidence is I will work any question samples, so samples that are coming from the crime scene first, and then I will work any standards. And the reason for that is because I do not want to have the potential to contaminate the actual items of evidence with the standards.
Okay. And did you follow that procedure for all of the items of evidence we're going to be talking about today?
Yes, I did.
All right. So I want to look at your results and your findings from the sexual assault kit.
Okay.
Is it fair to say that there wasn't much that qualified for further testing?
So I can qualify that a little bit. Specifically for sex assault kits, the typical scenario is a female victim and a male subject. If that is the scenario that I'm going, that has been provided to me, what I will do at the stage where I determine how much DNA is present in the sample, we have specific cutoffs where we know that we will get good DNA or a good profile, or we won't get a good profile. Specifically on those items of evidence, we are looking for what would be considered foreign DNA, so DNA that does not belong to the victim. So in a case where we have a female victim and a male subject, when I look at my quantitation values and I see that I have no male present, there is no reason to take on the sample because I know that I'm not going to get any male, and I'm looking for male in that sample. So specifically for the vaginal swabs, the anal swabs, the thigh swabs, and the breast swabs, there was no male detected in any of those samples. And then finally on the neck swabs, there was just not enough male DNA detected. So we also have a specific ratio, and if it does not meet that ratio, we know that the victim may overwhelm or overpower any of the male DNA that is present. So it is no good use for us to take that sample forward through the DNA testing process because we already know through our validated studies that we're not going to get a good DNA profile from that. So just to reiterate, the vaginal swabs, the anal swabs, the thigh swabs, and the breast swabs had no male DNA present, and the neck swabs just did not have enough male DNA present for us to take it on through the DNA testing process.
And when you're talking about that cutoff range, is that cutoff something that's specific to FDLE?
Yes. So FDLE, we have a specific instrument that we use and a specific kits that we use for our testing process. Those kits are commercially available for other laboratories to use, but when we validated or did our testing on that specific kit, we saw that after a specific cutoff, we would not see the results that we would like. So we determined that in order to save time and save money, we could drop those samples and not go forward with those samples and just continue on with our testing on other samples. So FDLE uses kits that are commercially available for other people, but we have validated the kit in a specific way that allows us to use these cutoffs and these ratios for the samples to be analyzed.
And when we're talking about cutoffs, you're just saying there wasn't enough DNA present in the sample for you to feel comfortable taking it on to the next level.
Yes. Again, it just depends on the reason why it was dropped. So some of them, there was no male DNA, so it didn't provide any useful results. It would not provide any useful results. And the other sample, it just did not have enough male DNA. So we have this cutoff where we know the female will overpower whatever male DNA is there.
Okay. And I mean, we're talking about female and male. I mean, would you agree that any gender could be sexually assaulted by the same gender or a different gender?
Yes. So the rules that I explained, they specifically only apply for a female victim and a male subject. If we have a female victim and a female subject, then the rules at that point don't apply because I'm not looking for any male DNA. If I have a male subject and a male victim and a female subject, then again, those rules don't apply because what I'm looking for is that female portion, and so I can't drop anything based on what male is present there or how much male is present because I know there's going to be some because I know the samples were taken from a male victim. And same thing is true from a male victim and a male subject. I know that I'm going to see some male DNA, so everything at that point gets taken on because I don't know from the quantitation step or how much DNA is there. I don't know how much of the male that is present is going to be of the victim and how much of the male there is from the subject. So those we do take on straight through the entire DNA testing process.
Were you able to look at and see if there was any DNA in the samples foreign to Miss Hill?
On these samples from the kit?
Yes.
So because I saw that there was no male present, they were not taken on through the rest of the DNA testing process. So I can't say that there wasn't any foreign DNA. I just know that there was no male DNA.
Okay. Were you able to obtain a complete DNA profile for Miss Hill from that sexual assault kit?
Yes, I did. One of the items that I did take on was a sample from, excuse me, let me just make sure, a sample from an oral swab, which again would be similar to a buccal swab, except we treat an oral swab as a question sample. The difference really is just when the swab was collected. But I did take that swab on and I obtained a DNA profile from Ms. Hill from that swab.
Okay. Sticking with that oral swab, can you explain the difference to the jury between an epithelial cell and some other kind of cell?
Yes. So as I explained before, DNA can be found. I'm sorry, I did not explain it. Let me just qualify that real quick. DNA can be found in every single cell of your body, with the exception of mature red blood cells. And we have specific technology that allows us, if there's possible sperm present in the sample, I can separate all the other cells versus sperm cells. So I have what we have, I then separate that sample and I have what's called an epithelial cell fraction, which would be any kind of cell, versus a sperm cell fraction, which would just be DNA coming from a sperm cell. There is sometimes where there is some carryover, so maybe a little bit of sperm got into epithelial and vice versa. But typically, those are the two different cell fractions that we have on items of evidence where we could reasonably expect sperm to be present.
Okay. And in the oral swabs, were you able to separate out an epithelial cell and a sperm cell fraction?
Yes, I was. The epithelial cell fraction was the fraction that gave me a complete profile that I used as a standard for Ms. Hill, and the sperm cell fraction had no male DNA. So that sample was not taken on through the rest of the DNA testing process.
Okay, and that might sound kind of foreign to us lay people, that a sperm cell might not have male DNA. How would that work?
So, so we have the two fractions, and at our quantitation step, we can detect how much autosomal DNA there is, so just DNA from any cell, versus how much DNA there is from male DNA. And the reason why we're able to do that is because males have a Y chromosome, while females only have an X chromosome. So we can determine how much male is present there. We can have a sperm cell fraction, but it just not have any male DNA. So there probably was no sperm in the sample to begin with.
Okay. What about the pubic hair combings?
Just confirm. I did look at the pubic hair combings, and I believe there was just no confirm. There was one possible hair that was found in the pubic hair combings, except it was not suitable. So I did not take it on through the DNA testing process. So to explain that a little bit, when I look at a hair, I take a look at it and I look at it under a microscope. I am looking for a specific type of hair where I know that I might get a DNA profile. This hair was found not suitable, so I did not see that specific root material that I was looking for to see if I can get a DNA profile from it. So nothing was done with that hair.
Did that complete your analysis of the sex assault kit?
Yes, it did.
So again, either no male DNA or not enough male DNA to move forward.
That's correct, yes.
All right. So I want to move on to your second report. And I want to talk about a couple of other buccal swabs that you received. I think you have 36A and B in front of you.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And do you recognize 36A and B?
Yes, I do. Again, they both have our unique yellow barcodes with my date and initials on them, and specifically States Exhibit 36B has my seals with my initials on it.
Okay. And what are 36A and B said to be?
So they are said to be, respectively, left buccal swab and right buccal swab from Christopher Harvey.
Okay. What about States 15 that you have in front of you?
Yes, I do.
You can tell me if you recognize that and how.
Yes, again, I recognize this item by the unique individual label, yellow barcode, as well as my seals and my date and initials on the item of evidence.
And what's States 15 said to be?
And this is said to be DNA swabs or buccal swabs from Jerry Moore.
Right. I think previously you mentioned you also got a left and right buccal swab from Miss Hill, and that was separate from the sex assault kit.
Yes, that's correct. That was State's Exhibit 30 and 31.
All right. Did you also analyze that, one of her buccal swabs?
So I did. I analyzed State's Exhibit 30. So once it came in, I analyzed it. I took it through the same DNA testing process, and I just confirmed that it was consistent with the standard that I had previously used. So the oral swab from the sex assault kit, I confirmed that those two samples were consistent.
Okay. So you obtained a suitable DNA profile for Miss Hill to compare to potential unknown pieces of evidence.
Yes, that's correct.
And I guess I'm taking you in the opposite process of how you probably worked, because you mentioned that you work with the unknown crime scene evidence first, and then you go to the buccals.
Yes, typically that's how I work. I also could potentially, let's say I could work this area, I could work the standards, and then in a separate area in a different room, I can work my unknown standards. But again, I only ever have one item of evidence open at a time, and I make sure that everything is clean in between examining items of evidence.
Okay. What were your, were you able to get a sufficient DNA profile for analysis from the buccal swabs from Jerry Moore?
Yes, I obtained a complete DNA profile, and a complete DNA profile just means that I obtained information at all of the areas that I am looking at.
And we haven't talked about that, and I don't want to get too in the weeds, but when you're talking about DNA, how many areas are there to look at?
So specifically in the forensics field at FDLE, we look at 24 areas, of which 3 of them are gender marker specific. So for the specific DNA that I'm looking at, which is called SDR, or a short tandem repeat, I am looking at specific small sections of the DNA that are short and they repeat in tandem, so in a head to tail fashion. And of those, I am looking at 21 different areas, and again, 3 gender markers for a total of 24 areas of the DNA.
Is that something that's widely found to be reliable, as well as generally accepted within the scientific community?
Yes, it is.
All right. Going to the buccal swabs from Christopher Harvey, can you tell us your findings for that?
So for Mr. Harvey, I obtained a partial DNA profile. So what that means is that I did not obtain all of the information, but I did obtain most of the information for that profile.
All right, and can you explain, if you only have most of the information, why not get another sample? Why not, try, tell law enforcement and, try again?
So specifically, it really just depends on what I'm looking at on the DNA. For his sample, I did see a lot of information, and we have a specific, again, I'm going to use the word very, in very general terms, we have a cutoff, where if how much DNA is present at an area is below a cutoff, then I cannot be certain that the second type is not present. So remember when I talked about the DNA coming from your mom and your dad? So half of it coming from your mom and half of it coming from your dad. So I can, for one person, at most expect 2 types. Whether those types are the same or different, I do not know that until I'm looking at the DNA profile. So we have a specific cutoff that anything above that cutoff, I can be certain that the second type is present in that sample. Anything below that cutoff, I cannot be 100% certain that the second type did not show up. So whenever that happens, I have to call that profile a partial profile. So specifically for Mr. Harvey, this only happened at one location. So because it was at one location out of the 24 different areas that I am looking at, I did not find it necessary to have to go back and get that, get a full, complete profile because it was just one location. Additionally, that was taken into consideration when I was comparing Mr. Harvey against all the question DNA samples that were obtained from the items of evidence.
Okay, and is that procedure consistent with FDLE's policies and standard operating procedures?
Yes, yes it is.
Right. Sorry, go ahead.
If I would have seen a lot less of his DNA, then yes, I would have gone back and done a little bit more troubleshooting, taken a little bit more sample. But again, as I was explaining, because it was just one area that was just below the cutoff, and I can tell you our cutoff is 400, and at his DNA type, it was 360. So just below, I did have to call it a partial profile.
Okay. But only 1 out of 24, and it was just slightly below the cutoff.
That's correct, yes.
Did that area, that one area, have any impact on any of your findings?
No, it did not.
Okay. How can you be sure?
So when I look at my findings, and I compare the known standard from an individual, and I compare it to the samples from the DNA profiles from the question items of evidence, I look to see that if that individual's types could be present or are present or consistent with the types that are present in the DNA sample. And so when I looked at the 23 areas, I did see consistent results between the standard of Mr. Harvey and the question samples.
Okay, so let's get into those question samples. I want to start with states 11, which I think you have in front of you.
Yes, I do.
Right. Can you tell us if you recognize states 11 and how?
Yes, I do. Again, I recognize it by our unique individual yellow barcode, as well as my dated initials and my initials over my seals specifically.
And what is states 11 said to be?
So it is said to be a swab of black gasket around rear driver's side door, and then in parentheses it says forward.
Right. When when you're analyzing a piece of an unknown sample from a crime scene, is there a presumptive test that you do to see if there's blood or not?
Yes. So a presumptive test just means that the substance that I'm looking for may be present in the sample. So specifically, for items of evidence that could possibly contain blood or look have a red-brown color to them, we do a presumptive test for the possible presence of blood. And specifically for item 15, that was not done for that sample because it was not needed for that sample. Excuse me.
And that was why? Why wasn't it needed?
So because it did not have that red-brownish color to that sample.
Okay. Were you able to locate any DNA on states 11, the swab of the black gasket around the rear driver's side door of the Ford?
Yes, I obtained a complete DNA profile that was consistent coming from a male individual. Mm-hmm. I then compared Mr. Harvey to that sample, and Mr. Harvey matched the sample from the DNA evidence, and I calculated a statistic for that match.
All right, and you talked about the statistics before. Can you explain what that is and what a likelihood ratio is?
Yes, so as Ms. Fox mentioned, our statistic is called a likelihood ratio. I only calculate statistics when I include or match someone to a sample. The statistic that we calculate, a likelihood ratio, it is just a statistic that compares, given the DNA evidence that I see, it compares the hypothesis that someone contributed their DNA to the profile versus that DNA profile being contributed by someone else other than that specific person. So for example, if I have a single source profile and I look at it and I determine that my types are consistent with the types of the sample, I calculate that statistic. And my two hypotheses are, given the DNA evidence, did I contribute my DNA profile to the sample versus the DNA evidence, given the DNA evidence, did someone else contribute their DNA to that profile? So the statistic that is bigger than 1 tells me that the first hypothesis is more likely to have been true.
Okay. What was the likelihood ratio you calculated for including Christopher Harvey in the DNA profile of the swab of the black gasket around the rear driver's side door of the Ford?
So, the observed DNA profile from the swab of the black gasket is greater than 700 billion times more likely to have occurred if it came from Mr. Harvey, if it originated from Mr. Harvey, then the sample originated from someone else.
Right. And that's 700 billion times more likely. Is that an arbitrary cutoff? Where does that come from?
Yes, so again, there is a cutoff that is arbitrary. So the number that I actually calculate is much, much bigger than that. But because the numbers can get really, really big on these types of statistics, we have a specific arbitrary cutoff that everyone can get their minds around it. Because sometimes the numbers that I calculate, I can't grasp the number because it's just so big. So we have an arbitrary cutoff that is greater than 700 billion, and anyone can reasonably understand that number.
Okay. Are you able to tell us the exact likelihood ratio for
Yes, I
Christopher Harvey
can.
in this match?
Yes, I can. Let me just refer to my notes real quick. So the specific likelihood ratio that was calculated is 23 septillion. So that's a 23 with 24 zeros following it.
Okay. May I approach and switch out some of our exhibits, Judge?
You may.
Providing you with States Exhibit 19 and 22. You can first take a look at 22.
Okay.
And tell me
If you recognize it and what it is.
So I do recognize it. So this is the outer package that has, again, that unique yellow barcode, as well as, see if you can see it. I don't know if you can, but there I have my specific individual seals right up here at the top of this bag. When I received it, it was all sealed, and it was not in this plastic bag. And these items of evidence were the tan material here was inside of the bag, and this specifically is an item that I created that was just from the debris that came off of the tan material.
Okay. What testing did you perform on States 22, the tan material?
So for the tan material, I did test the sample, the item of evidence, for any possible presence of blood, and it failed to give me any indications of blood. But I did take on a sample from the entire tan material, trying to avoid any of the burnt areas or the possible soot that can be seen on the item of evidence. And that sample was taken on through the DNA testing process, except there was just not enough DNA present to be taken on through the entire DNA testing process.
Okay. So because of that, did you conduct any further analysis?
No, I did not, because again, there was not enough DNA present on the sample that I took.
Was there even enough to determine if the DNA you found was a male?
Let me take a look at my notes, if I may. So from that item, again, there was just not enough DNA present, and specifically, There was no male present on that sample.
All right, so I want to move to States 19.
Okay.
You can take a look at that and tell me if you recognize it and how.
Okay, yes, I do recognize it. Sorry. So again, here's the original packaging, and I recognize it by my specific unique yellow label, yellow barcode label, as well as my date and initials, and my seals are actually at the very bottom of that brown paper bag. Additionally, I also can confirm this black shirt, and I recognize this black shirt because these are the samples that I specifically took from the black shirt. I was also trying to see if I can look at my label, but I could not manipulate it enough to see my label, but there should be a label in the inside of the shirt that has my date, my initials, the specific case number, and the specific item number of this item.
Okay, and what is Exhibit 19 said to be?
So it is said to be a black shirt.
All right, and when you received Exhibit 19, was it right side out or inside out?
Again, let me just confirm with my notes. The shirt was specifically, it was inside out.
And that was within the sealed LC, like packaging from the agency?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So when you receive a shirt that's inside out, what do you do?
So typically I look at that point, that would be the inside of the shirt, right? I look at the inside of the shirt and see if there's any visible staining. I also look for any possible hairs that could be present or anything that just looks off, let's say. If I do not see anything, I then turn the shirt right side in. So I turned it inside out again so that the outside of the shirt would be the area that I am looking at. I then look through the entire shirt. Again, I look for any specific staining, and I try to see if there's any possible hairs or any possible debris on the shirt. Specifically, on the shirt, I found that there was 2 brownish stains on the outside of the front of the shirt. And there was some possible sweat stains as well on the front of the shirt, in the pit area.
Can you hold that up for the jury and point out where the red and brown stains were?
Yes. So it's very hard to see, but I did see some brownish stains right here and also down here.
Okay. Did you take a sample of those stains?
Yes. So as you can see, there's a little bit of the shirt missing here. So I took 2 cuttings from this area, and I took about 4 cuttings from the staining that was down here. Prior to me taking those cuttings from the shirt, I did do what we call the presumptive test, for the possible presence of blood, and it did give me indications of blood, which is why I then took on samples from that specific area, or those 2 specific areas, excuse me.
Okay. And you mentioned that you saw an area under the pits of the shirt that was consistent with potentially sweat staining?
On the, yes, I saw it on the inside front of the shirt as well as the outside of the front of the shirt.
Okay, could you
So
show us where?
Don't know if we could
At
really
least from the outside of the shirt.
see it. Let me see. Really hard to see with this plastic. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, there's a glare.
So there is some possible sweat stains kind of on the stitching of the shirt, and it's just a discoloration on that shirt right there. And I can only see it on this side. I can't see it on the other side because it's kind of flipped in.
Okay. Do you take samples from something like that or swabs?
Typically, we don't take samples from areas of staining in the pit areas because typically we all wear deodorant, right? And deodorant has been shown to interfere with our DNA testing. So we try to avoid the pit areas for that specific reason. But I can take samples from a shirt like this from specific areas that are in high contact with the skin of the individual wearing the shirt. So I also did that for this shirt. I took a sample from the collar, so our collar is constantly rubbing, as well as the inside seams of the shirt, so the inside shoulder seams of the shirt that would be, again, constantly rubbing against the skin of the individual that's wearing the shirt.
Okay, and does that help, and you've mentioned wearer, to help determine who was wearing that shirt?
Yes, so those samples are taken to determine to see who could have possibly worn that shirt.
All right. So I want to start with your findings from the areas that you looked at for wearer. So you mentioned the inside of the collar and the inside of the shoulder seams.
Yes.
What were your findings?
So again, I just took one sample from that to try to concentrate as much DNA from who could have possibly worn that shirt. I did get a DNA profile from that sample, excuse me, and it was consistent with a mixture of 2 people, 2 donors, and including at least 1 male contributed their DNA to the sample. Mr. Harvey was included to that mixture that was obtained, and Ms. Hill and Mr. Moore were both excluded to that mixed DNA profile that was obtained from the possible wearer sample of the shirt. For Mr. Harvey, because he was included as a possible contributor, I did calculate a statistic, and specifically for the mixed DNA profile, it is greater than 700 billion times more likely that the DNA profile originated from Mr. Harvey and someone else than from 2 other individuals.
Okay. When you have a mixture of a DNA profile, does it necessarily mean that like 2 different people definitely wore that shirt at some point?
No, it does not. It can. With our DNA testing process, I cannot tell you how the DNA was placed on the item of evidence or when it was placed on the item of evidence. So it could be that 2 people wore the shirt. It also could be that there could have been a possible transfer. So let's say maybe somebody was roughly touching the shirt on the inside or possibly the outside, and they transferred their DNA onto the shirt. So I cannot specifically say that only 2 people ever wore that shirt or 2 people did wear that shirt. I can't even say that 1 person touched it and 1 person wore it, because all of those are possible ways to get a mixture on a shirt, specifically from the sample that I took as a wearer sample.
And so you said your analysis of the wearer of that shirt was Christopher Harvey was included.
Correct, to the mixed DNA profile that was obtained, yes.
Okay. And who was excluded?
Ms. Hill and Mr. Moore were both excluded.
Okay. For the likelihood ratio you obtained for the wearer profile of that shirt, it was the 700 billion times, greater than 700 billion times more likely. Could you give us the exact ratio that you obtained?
Yes, so the exact number that was calculated for that sample it was 12 septillion. So again, that's 12 with 24 zeros following it.
And that was 12 septillion times more likely that Christopher Harvey was included in that mixed DNA profile for the wearer of the black t-shirt.
So yes, given the DNA profile that I observed, Mr. Harvey was included, and it's greater the mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to have occurred if it originated from Christopher Harvey and someone else versus 2 other individuals.
All right. Can we move on to the clippings that you took from the reddish-brownish staining that indicated positive for the presence of blood?
Yes. So I took, again, there was 2 areas of that reddish-brown stain where I'm going to refer to them as sample A and sample B. And just so you know, sample A is this bottom staining right here, and sample B is the staining up here at the middle of the shirt. But for both of those samples that I took, it resulted in a mixture consistent of 2 people, 2 donors, and including at least 1 male contributor. For both of those, I compared all of the standards that I had, and I'll go through them individually, but Ms. Hill was included as a possible contributor to both of the mixed DNA profiles, and the observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to have occurred if the sample originated from Ms. Hill and someone else versus 2 other people. Then I compared Mr. Harvey to that mixed DNA profile, to both of those mixed DNA profiles, and he was also included as a possible contributor to the DNA profile that was obtained. And given the DNA profile that was obtained, Mr. Harvey, the observed mixed DNA profile is greater than 700 billion times more likely to have occurred from Mr. Harvey and someone else versus 2 other individuals. And finally, Mr. Moore was excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profiles that were obtained.
Okay. You've talked a little bit about blood. As opposed to when I say touch DNA, I'm talking about, like, I'm touching this desk. Could I potentially leave DNA behind?
Yes, you could.
What kind of DNA would I be leaving behind by just touching something?
So that could be any of those epithelial cells, so any cells, skin cells, it could be possible sweat cells or cells that are being carried through sweat. So any of those types of cells could be left behind whenever you touch an item.
What about blood? Would you consider it to be, does blood contain more DNA than if I touch this?
Yes, typically blood or samples originating from a bodily fluid, so blood, semen, saliva, and even spit, will have more concentrated or more DNA present versus samples that are coming from possible touch. So if I were to briefly touch this podium, I could leave behind some DNA, but I could also not leave behind DNA. It really just depends on various conditions, not only of the podium, but also of my hands. So typically, if an area is rough versus smooth, you could potentially leave more DNA behind. If I'm sweating a lot, or if versus me recently just washing my hands, that could lead to leaving more or less DNA behind on a touch sample. The length of time of how long I touched it, so just touching it like this might not leave any, but it might leave some. Also, if I'm constantly like touching my face or constantly like rubbing my hands, again, that could be an indication of possibly leaving more, or I could not leave much DNA behind. So there's a lot of variables that go behind touch DNA, as opposed to a bodily fluid. Once that bodily fluid is deposited, depending on the conditions of the item of evidence after the bodily fluid is deposited on it, we could get more DNA present on the bodily fluid.
Okay. And so if blood were present, would you expect to see higher levels in the profile than if it came from skin cells?
Yes.
Right. So I want to ask you about major versus minor contributors, or major or more major contributors, if you want to call it that. Are you able to look at a mixture percentage? Because we're talking about there were mixtures in this sample, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Are you able to look at a mixture percentage of who contributed what percentage to this sample?
So whenever I look at a mixed DNA profile, depending on what it looks like, I can visually see, okay, there is one person that is contributing more DNA to the sample versus another person. And that is just based on my values off of the DNA that I've observed. Whenever I see a mixed DNA profile, we then take it through a specific, sorry, I want to say instrument, but a specific application or software program that is called STRmix. And this software program helps me deconvolute, or in other words, determine the DNA types for the possible DNA types for the first contributor versus the possible DNA types for the second contributor. So once it goes through this software, I can tell, and I look at what the output from the software, and I could see if it is consistent with what I expected. So I could see for 6A, or excuse me, sample A, that there was someone contributing their DNA profile, about 90% of the profile belonged to contributor 1, and about only 10% of the DNA profile belonged to contributor 2. Once I do that analysis, I then go through the entire DNA profile and I compare the profile of each individual. So in this case, Ms. Hill, Mr. Harvey, and Mr. Moore. I could tell that the contributor 1, or the contributor that was higher in the sample, was consistent with the DNA types originating from Ms. Hill. And the DNA types from the second contributor, so the lower level contributor, were consistent with those DNA types coming from Mr. Harvey.
Okay, so I want to take the jury through you said that 6A, and could you show us where that staining was on that shirt?
Yes, again, so sample 6A is coming from the bottom of the shirt here. And I say 6 because 6 is my item number. So this black shirt for me is item 6, but it is State's Exhibit 19. Sure. So sample A is from the bottom, and sample B is from this middle staining right here.
Okay, and you determined contributor 1 was Ms. Hill, and what percentage did she contribute to that mixture that you just showed us?
So yes, Ms. Hill was consistent with the DNA types for contributor 1. And just confirm here, sorry. Mr. Harvey was consistent with the DNA types for contributor 2.
Okay, and contributor 1 contributed approximately what percentage of that mixture?
90%.
All right, so Ms. Hill contributed 90% to that mixture. What about Mr. Harvey?
Was 10%.
The remaining 10%.
Yes.
If someone is contributing 90% of a mixture and someone else is only contributing 10% of a mixture, and you have a presumptive positive test for blood, are you able to say, would you expect, or is that consistent with that 90% coming from blood?
I cannot tell what type of DNA is present. My testing did show that it is that staining is possibly blood, but I cannot say specifically it is blood. Specifically, I can't even say that it is human blood. For all we know, it could be rat blood. I don't know. But it is possible to be blood. Now, from the DNA profile that I obtained from those samples, yes, I did have someone that is contributing their DNA more to the sample versus a secondary person. And I can make the inference that it's possibly because there is a bodily fluid there. But I cannot specifically say, yes, that the one contributor is solely coming from blood. I can only say that there is possible blood on this stain, and I can say Ms. Hill is included and Mr. Harvey is included. But I cannot tell you that Ms. Hill provided blood and Mr. Harvey, Mrs. Hill's DNA profile is coming from blood and Mr. Harvey is coming from possible skin cells. It could be that there's a mixture of blood from both Mr. Hill and Miss Hill, and Mr. Harvey, but I cannot separate the type of DNA that is present there on that sample.
For 6A, though, you would consider her to be the major contributor to that red-brown staining mixture.
Her types, Miss Hill's types, are consistent with those for contributor 1, yes. And Mr. Harvey is consistent, his types are consistent with the DNA types for contributor 2.
Okay, let's move on to 6B. Can you show us where that was again on the shirt?
Yes, so 6B is the staining up here.
Were you able to do the same analysis that you just talked about for 6B?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What can you tell us about contributor 1 and contributor 2 for the brown staining that tested presumptive positive for blood in 6B?
So for 6B, contributor 1 contributed about 63% of the DNA to the mixture, and contributor 2 about 37% of that DNA was for contributor 2.
And what types were contributor 1 and contributor 2 consistent with?
So contributor 1 was consistent with Miss Hill, and contributor 2 was consistent with Mr. Harvey.
Okay. So Miss Hill on 6B was approximately 63% of the mixture, and Mr. Harvey was approximately 37% of the mixture. Types consistent with?
Yes, those types were consistent with contributor. Mrs. Hill was consistent with contributor 1, and Mr. Harvey was consistent with contributor 2. So let me talk about that, why I'm using that specific language, consistent with. Because, as you know, there are over 8 billion people in the world, and much more than that have lived in the world. I have not tested, or really no forensic laboratory has tested every single individual that has lived, is living, or will live in the future. And because of that, I can't say that a DNA type or a DNA profile is coming solely from that specific person, because there could be a chance that someone else also has that same DNA profile. Given what research we have done, and by we I mean the scientific community, we can say that the DNA type, the areas that I'm looking at, are unique to each individual, but each individual that we have tested. But again, we have not tested every single individual that has lived, is currently living, or will live in the future. So I can't say specifically this profile is can only be coming from that person. So for that reason, I say that the DNA types that I see are consistent with the DNA types from a specific individual. Additionally, because we do have that possibility that for some reason 2 people could have the same DNA profile, we calculate a statistic. So that statistic just gives you a weight of how likely, given that DNA profile, how likely one individual could have contributed their DNA to the mixed profile or single source profile versus someone else. And when I say someone else, I mean an unknown, unrelated individual could have contributed their DNA types to the profile. So when the statistic is greater than 1, then we could say the first hypothesis is true. If it is less than 1, then we could say the secondary hypothesis could be true. Again, it just could be. There are lots of pieces at play, and I could just say that they are consistent with, because again, I have not tested, or no forensic laboratory has tested every single individual in the world population.
Okay, sure. So let's take a look at 6C, and that was the wearer sample from the shirt.
Yes.
Right. Were you able to look at the percentage for a contributor to that mixture?
Oh, yes. So contributor 1 was about 92% of the mixture, and contributor 2 was only about 8% of the mixture.
Who was contributor 1 consistent with?
Oh, excuse me. And Mr. Harvey was consistent with contributor 1.
And that was the one that, were you able to exclude Mr. Moore and Ms. Hill from that?
Yes, both Ms. Hill and Mr. Moore, are excluded as a contributor to the mixed DNA profile from the wearer of the shirt.
Okay. Now, for the black shirt, for each of the areas that you identified, I would like to ask you the specific likelihood ratios of each of those areas.
Okay, for each of the individuals that I calculated statistics, correct?
6A and 6B, you had Rodrica Hill included, and you mentioned it was 700 billion times more likely to occur.
Mm-hmm.
What was your actual number?
So for sample A, Ms. Hill's actual calculated statistic is 10 octillion. So that is a 10 with 27 zeros following it. And for Mr. Harvey, specifically, that is 130 quintillion, and that is 130 with 18 zeros following it. For 6B, for Ms. Hill, the specific likelihood ratio that was calculated is 3.2 septillion. So that is a 3 followed by, 3.2 followed by 23 zeros. And for Mr. Harvey, that is 3.7 sextillion. So that's a 3.7 with 20 zeros following behind it. And finally, for 6C, for Mr. Harvey, the likelihood ratio that was calculated was 12 septillion, which is the number 12 followed by 24 zeros. So you can see how those numbers are really, really big, and it's easier to understand greater than 700 billion.
How many people are on the planet at your last check, if you know?
I believe the scientific community last reported that there's about 8 billion people in the world currently.
Okay. Does that conclude your analysis of the black t-shirt?
Yes, it does.
Right. Permission to approach and switch out some exhibits?
Matt.
I'm showing you what has been considered evidence with states 27 and states 28. You could take a look at those.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Starting with states 27, how do you recognize it and what does it purport to be?
So for states exhibit number 27, again, I identified my yellow unique barcode, as well as my date and initials, and all around here are my date and initials on seals, on specific seals.
Okay.
Since various people tested this item, there's multiple seals on this item. And for states exhibit number 28, again, I have my unique yellow barcode from FDLE with my date and initials, and my seals are on, my initials are on my seals for this item.
For states 27, what does it purport to be?
It is a Lorsen semi-auto with magazine plus 3 rounds, and the serial number for this gun is 025621.
Did you perform any type of testing for DNA, absence or presence, on this item, the Lorsen 9mm?
Yes, for this Lorsen handgun, because the handgun was asked to be tested by various disciplines within FDLE, specifically biology, friction ridge, and the firearms section. I have to take a look at the handgun in a very specific way because I do not want to possibly destroy any evidence that is there for any of the other disciplines. So specifically, when that happens, I will only be taking samples from textured portions of the items of evidence. So specifically for this gun, I swabbed what is called the ejector button, so the button that is pressed for the magazine to be pulled out, and as well as the back part of the slide. So on the slide of the gun, there was a textured portion towards the back of it, and I swabbed that area as well, both of those together as one sample. I also swabbed the magazine, and if you just picture a magazine, just on the edges of the bottom plate, I swabbed that, as well as what is called the follower. So the area where you when you push in the ammunition onto the magazine. So those two areas were swabbed as one sample. So I took 2 samples from this gun.
And you were talking about the order in which FDLE individual labs receive evidence. Does DNA get first shot?
Yes, typically, again, just depending on the case scenario and depending on the disciplines that is asked to look at this item of evidence, DNA is usually first, followed by friction ridge, and then finally firearms.
Permission to publish a photograph of the Lorsen, Judge.
No.
The inputs wrong. I'm publishing 18cc. So, Ms. Hill, you were mentioning an ejector button and then a base plate of the magazine. Are you able to point out where those items are?
Yes. So for the first sample that I took, I don't believe the ejector button is on this side. It's probably on the other side.
I can publish 18BB.
Okay. So if you look at this textured portion up here, that is the back of the slide that I was swabbed.
Is that where my cursor is?
Yes. And then if you could go back to the first picture, I'm sorry.
Sure.
So you see the same texture on the other side of the slide. And then that ejector button is this button right here, down at the bottom.
Where my cursor is?
Yes.
Right. And what were your results from those areas?
So for both of those areas, there was enough DNA on to take it on for DNA testing, but it was too limited. So for both of those DNA profiles, it was just too limited. There was not enough information there for me to make any interpretations on the samples. So I could not make a determination of how many people contributed their DNA to these profiles. So both of these profiles were not interpreted because they were just too limited in nature. There was not enough information there for me.
Right. I'm going to move on to States 28, which you mentioned. Was that the Sig Sauer 9mm?
Yes, it is a 6 Sauer P365 with a serial number 66A470869, and with magazine and 3 rounds of ammunition.
All right, I'm publishing 18FF a photograph of the Sig Sauer, and if you need to see the other side, let me know. Could you let the jury know what areas of this firearm you swabbed?
So again, this firearm also had requests for analysis of friction, biology, friction ridge, and firearms. So I only swabbed the textured portions. So I swabbed, with one swab, I swabbed the grip. So all of this textured portion that you see here on the grip, and even on the
cursor is?
Yes, and on the back side of the grip as well of the firearm. I'm sorry, can you go back?
Sorry? Oh, sorry, I thought you meant to turn the firearm over.
No.
Yes, in a minute.
So I also swabbed, there's some texture on the front of the slide of the firearm up here, and the back of the slide
Is that
as
where
well.
my cursor is?
Yes,
Okay, so these like vertical lines.
yes.
Right.
So that on both sides of the gun. And those were the textured areas that I took from the gun. From the magazine, you can actually see it on that picture that the what is called the base plate of the magazine, that is textured all the way throughout. So all of that was swabbed. And so right there, where the cursor is. And then I also swabbed the follower. So all the way at the top of the magazine where you would be putting in those rounds of ammunition. So up here.
Where the cursor is?
Yes.
Okay. Was that all in one swab, or was that multiple swabs?
So the textured areas from the handgun was one swab, and the textured areas from the magazine was a separate swab.
The textured areas from the handgun, so the slide and the grip, what were your results from that swab?
So from that swab, I obtained a mixture consistent with 2 donors and including at least 1 male contributor. Ms. Hill was included as a possible contributor to that mixed DNA profile, and the mixed DNA profile is approximately 3,000 times more likely to have occurred if the sample originated from Ms. Hill and someone else versus 2 other individuals. I also compared Mr. Harvey to that mixed DNA profile, and he was included as a possible contributor. And the observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 18 million times more likely to have occurred if the sample originated from Mr. Harvey and someone else versus 2 other individuals.
All right, so we've been dealing up until now with some really, really large numbers. Can you explain why we might get smaller numbers on samples with DNA sometimes?
Yes. So the smaller numbers are going to be due to less amount of DNA types present. So the more information I have, the higher the calculated statistic will be, versus if I have less information, then I'm not going to have as high of statistics on that. So that's kind of what happened with this sample. Is I did not have a lot of information. I did have enough information for me to interpret it and determine that it was a mixture coming from 2 donors and including at least 1 male donor. But the information that was there calculated lower numbers than the numbers that we have seen because I did not have all of the information present from all of the contributors.
Okay. Is that something that frequently happens with DNA that you've seen?
Yeah, it definitely happens whenever I have less information present in the sample.
Can that be affected by the type of item that you're sampling from?
Yes, it can.
Okay. What's a great surface to leave DNA on?
So kind of what we were talking about before, if you have that rougher surface, the length of contact, if you have charged your hands with DNA, so if you have been constantly touching or rubbing your face or your other parts of your body, then you might have more DNA present on your hands versus if you just recently washed your hands, you might have washed away all that possible DNA. So there's all of those variables that go into how we can leave DNA behind, with the exception of bodily fluids. Once you leave a bodily fluid, we expect there to be more DNA present in that bodily fluid stain versus from when you touch, kind of again, like I had explained earlier.
Okay. And you can kind of see in this photograph that this gun was located in a plastic bag. Can putting items against each other or wrapping it around some type of plastic item potentially rub off DNA that might have been there?
Yes, that is definitely true. That is a possibility. You could take, for example, this handgun and you could clean it off, and you could clean off the possible DNA that was on there. That's another variable. Another variable that could prevent the amount of DNA that you leave behind is if you're wearing gloves, for example. So if you're wearing gloves, you might not have enough DNA there present. Additionally, whenever once that DNA has been deposited on the item of evidence, depending on the storage condition, that will either interfere with my DNA testing or it'll keep the stain pristine, the stain or the touch DNA evidence. We have a policy, which is part of our evidence submission policy, that any samples that are coming in from the agency to us for DNA testing process has to be in a breathable container. So what does that mean? So a breathable container would just be a cardboard box or a brown paper bag or anything like that. We do not want the item of evidence to be stored in plastic. And the reason for that is because, you can't breathe through plastic, but also that plastic could be contributing to possible mold. So if there is any water that is residual on the item of evidence and it's stored in plastic, then we can kind of create a mold situation that will just eat up away the DNA that is present there. So whenever an item of evidence is wrapped in plastic or anything like that, it might not be conducive for DNA testing.
All right. What about rain? What impact does rain have on DNA?
So yes, the environment can also have various impacts. So if it is out in the sun for too long, then the DNA could just burst open. If it is raining, then the DNA could possibly be washed off, or again, the cells could just burst open, and that DNA is not going to be as prevalent as it could have been when it was first deposited. As well as humidity, as we know here in the state of Florida, it's very humid.
So if an item, and I'm going to publish 18Y that's already in evidence, if that firearm was located wrapped in 2 plastic bags in an outdoor environment where rain could have possibly taken place, what impact would you expect that to have on any potential DNA?
Again, kind of like I explained, I would expect that DNA to possibly be less, but it all just depends on various factors. Specifically, from the time it was deposited, so the gun being put in these plastic bags and left, to the time that it was found and collected by the agency and then put into the correct packaging where we accept the item of evidence.
And what impact does, with firearms in particular, I think one of the photographs we were looking at with was 18DD of the Lorsen, when law enforcement has to make a gun safe, meaning they have to rack it and make sure there's nothing in the chamber. They might be wearing gloves, but what impact, if any, would that have on any potential DNA?
So again, just kind of like I was saying, we could leave DNA behind, but I could also pick up DNA. So whoever was sitting here before, if they were constantly rubbing this area, I could be picking up their DNA from that area, and now it's on my hands. So same thing is true when law enforcement, even though they're wearing gloves, when they have to render a firearm safe, they could potentially be taking away some of that DNA that was on that item of evidence.
And could that contribute to, like we see in your analysis with the Sig Sauer likelihood ratios, there's less than what we were looking at with the T-shirt?
Yes, that's correct. All of these are all possible variables that could have gone in as to why there was less DNA types present on those samples that I took.
Okay. So for the Sig Sauer, Ms. Hill and Mr. Harvey were both present. Mr. Harvey was 18 million times more likely?
Yes, the mixed observed DNA profile is 18 million times more likely to have occurred if it originated from Mr. Harvey and someone else versus 2 other individuals.
And that was the grip and the slide.
That was, yes, the grip and the slide. Excuse me, I had to make sure.
Okay. Were you able to exclude anyone from that DNA mixture?
So Mr. Moore was excluded.
All right. To your second sample that you took of the magazine base plate, or I'm sorry, not the magazine base plate, the top, shown in 18GG, the top of the magazine?
Yes, so it was the top of the magazine and the base plate. Both of those were swabbed. And for both of those, there was just not enough DNA present for me to make any interpretation. So it was too limited to make any interpretations, excuse me.
So of each of the items that you were able to obtain sufficient DNA results to move on to the comparison process, was Mr. Moore excluded from each of those?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. And the people involved in the mixtures were Rodrica Hill and Christopher Harvey?
Yes, Ms. Hill and Mr. Harvey were both included as possible contributors to those mixtures that were obtained.
And then with the exception of the black gasket around the rear driver door, that was only Mr. Harvey?
Yes, that's correct. That was a complete DNA profile, and Mr. Harvey matched that complete DNA profile.
Okay. I don't have anything further this time.
Ben Cindy Cross.
Yes, Judge, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Hyatt.
Good morning.
So I know you gave some pretty lengthy testimony on direct examination. I just want to clear up some things. So on direct examination, when you were talking about the T-shirt, the state was characterizing the staining on the shirt as red. You remember that?
Yes.
But in fact, on your report, you don't ever use the word red. You use the word brown. Is that correct? And if you just look at the first page of your October 29th, 2021 report for item 6.
Yes, I noted it to be a staining that was brownish in color.
And if you had noticed yourself that there was a red tone to it, you would have included that in your report. Is that correct?
Yes, I would have said red-brown staining or red staining, but specifically for this one, it was brown staining that I saw.
And on direct, the state also asked you about the presence of possible blood. And I believe during your testimony, you clarified that there was just a possibility there were never any determinations made about actual blood present. Do I have that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And in fact, you as an agency, but you in particular for this case, don't do any bodily fluid identifications.
That's correct. At FDLE, we do not identify any bodily fluids. The only true bodily fluid that we can identify is sperm or semen.
So this brown stain that you found could have been anything that was not blood, right?
Yes, that's correct. But it, like I said, it did give the possible presence, give chemical indications, of the possible presence of blood.
So it could have been food.
Yes. So specifically, just to qualify that answer, the testing that we use is called phenolphthalein. It is a color change test. So the steps that I do do this test is if I see a red-brown stain, or if I'm trying to determine if blood is possibly there, I will rub the stain with a type of paper. I then add 3 chemicals. After my second chemical that I add, I take a pause just to see if there could be any reaction there. If there is a reaction...
Ms. Hyatt, can you just focus on that was a yes or no question. If we could just save the explanations for redirect if there's any need for that. Your next question, please.
Yes, Judge. So, Ms. Hyatt, I just want to make sure the DNA results you got from 6A, FDLE 6A and 6B, not what's been entered into evidence, those are the brown spots, brown stains on the T-shirt, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And your analysis of those areas of the shirt demonstrated the presence of a mixture consistent with 2 donors, including one that was a male contributor.
Yes, that's correct.
And you noted that Ms. Hill was a possible contributor with a note of an epithelial cell fraction.
Yes, so Ms. Hill's standard that I used was the epithelial cell fraction from the oral swab from the kit.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding this a little bit better, maybe for all of us. So if there's a brown stain on a shirt and then you test for an epithelial cell fraction on there, could it be that there is like a little flake of your skin, or I think you said that there's skin cells all over our body, right? Did I hear that correctly on direct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so any one of those little microscopic cells could be on a brown dirt stain on your T-shirt.
Yes, that's correct. But just to clarify, the
And I want to just make sure I'm understanding about that. So then with the T-shirt that you looked at with the state, Your Honor, if I could approach.
Yeah.
So for the record, I'm handing Ms. Hyatt what's been entered as State Exhibit 19. And is the mic picking up as I? Okay. So Ms. Hyatt, this is Exhibit 19, and you see the bottom areas of the T-shirt. Do you see that?
Yes.
So you're pointing out on direct. There are holes in that T-shirt, right?
Yes.
Are those the holes that were cut out that reflected the brown staining?
So these were holes that I took samples from that brown staining. So the holes were the holes that I made when I took my samples from the shirt, from the brown staining.
Okay, so then the brown staining is within those holes.
Yes, and around the holes.
Okay. So it's also possible that the mixture could have been from 2 males. I believe you testified to that on direct as well.
No, I did not. So for our DNA testing process, I can only only say that one of those contributors could be a male contributor. I cannot say how many males are present because our gender markers that we look at, they're not specific to males. Excuse me. They are specific to males, but they do not have a lot of variability. So a lot of males could have those same DNA types that I saw for those male gender markers. So, and I believe what we were just talking about now was for 6A and 6B, FDLE 6A and 6B on the T-shirt. 6C around the collar of the T-shirt, that was what had the presence of the possibility of 2 male contributors, correct? Again, it had the mixed DNA profile that I obtained is consistent with coming from 2 donors and at least 1 male contributor. I can never say that if there is a mixture of 2 people, I can't say that both people are males because, again, males for those DNA types that we are looking at, those gender markers that we are looking at, 2 males could have the exact same DNA types, and I cannot differentiate between the 2 if they have the same types.
I understand. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So because of the male DNA and they look the same, you see that there's at least one male, but it is possible that there were two males present.
Yes, that's correct. It is
Okay.
possible.
Got it. Thank you. And you weren't able to determine who both of the donors were, just that there was a mixture of at least two.
Yes.
So on the Lorsen, the firearm, I believe it was the first one the state put up during your direct testimony, there was no interpretable DNA from this item, correct?
That's correct. It was too limited.
And on the Sig Sauer in your analysis, there was limited interpretable data from this item, correct?
From sample B, which was the sample that I had taken from the magazine, yes.
And I believe for the DNA that you did test with the likelihood from Mr. Harvey and another individual, the 18 million times likelihood, is that correct? That number?
Yes, the observed mixed DNA profile is approximately 18 million times more likely to have been observed if it originated from Mr. Harvey and someone else versus two other individuals.
And you've had cases before where the statistic or the number winds up in the likelihoods of the billions, right?
Yes, billions and even bigger.
Now, you testified about this a bit on direct, but there is secondary transfer of DNA, right? Like you were explaining through touching the edge of the table and then moving it to another location. So I want to ask you a little bit more about this. If I'm touching someone who's sweaty and then I touch this table, it's possible that I'm transferring that DNA material to this second surface.
Yes, from the person that is sweating.
And there is no difference in DNA that's transferred by a direct deposit versus DNA that's transferred by a secondary transfer.
Correct. I cannot make a determination as to how or when that DNA was deposited.
And DNA can come from sweat, right?
Yes, it can.
Saliva,
Yes.
skin, like we've talked about. And like you've testified for us, your report doesn't specify the kind of DNA.
Correct. We cannot tell what type of DNA the sample originated from.
You also can't tell how long DNA stays on a surface.
That's also correct.
And you also can't determine the sequential order of any DNA that you might find on an item.
So if I'm understanding correctly, correct. I can't determine who left the DNA first and who left their DNA second. It could have all just been all together at the same time. I cannot make that determination.
This burn tan material that we talked about that you were looking at for DNA analysis, you didn't make any DNA determinations from this item as well.
There was not enough DNA present on the sample that I took to take on board through the DNA testing process. So no, I did not.
So when you're given items to analyze, these items come from a law enforcement agency that may be investigating a case?
Yes, typically law enforcement submits crime scene evidence to FDLE.
And you're typically given some background information about the items of the case, or the case of the items that you're looking at.
Yes, I need to have some background information because I can do a lot of DNA testing and I need to kind of focus on what I am looking for and what type of testing that needs to be done. So I do need a little bit of background information from the case as well as the items of evidence that I'm looking at.
And the information in this case was given to you by Detective Robert Gaines. And if you need help finding a spot, I can help you out with
Yes,
that.
yes it was.
Okay. Judge, may I have a moment?
You may.
Thank you. Ms. Hyatt, so just a few more questions. For FDLE item 6C, the collar, you indicated that it was, I believe, a 92% likelihood that the DNA came from Mr. Harvey, correct?
No, let me just,
Or as the major contributor?
if I can flip to my notes just to
Yes,
confirm.
certainly.
So for 6C, the mixture comprised, again, of 2 donors, and contributor 1 comprised about 92% of the profile.
Okay, and then there's 8%, and you didn't provide us with a name for that, or make a determination as to the 8%?
So Miss Hill and Mr. Moore were both excluded from that, so I cannot tell you who contributor 2 is.
And let's see, just a couple more questions. And going back to the information that you would have received from Deputy Gaines in preparation for your work on this case, you're also provided information that Jerry Moore was to be an elimination standard, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You didn't analyze any rounds of ammunition.
No, I did not.
Didn't analyze any DNA off of any other firearms other than the 2 we've been talking about.
That's correct.
And you didn't analyze any DNA from a Jermel Crumbie.
No, I did not. That standard was never provided to me. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was cutting you off. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Any redirects, Dave? Go ahead.
So I want to redirect your attention to something that you were cut off from answering about Miss Hill's epithelial cell fraction as it related to the sample on the T-shirt. What were you trying to say?
Oh, so I was just going to clarify that the standard was coming from the epithelial cell fraction. The sample from the shirt, I did not say was coming from epithelial cells.
Okay, so that was just like her buccal, her oral swab sample that you got a complete DNA profile from.
Correct, was from her epithelial cell fraction from that sample.
And that was from the sex kit?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, so you had two buccal DNA profile swabs for her, right? You had the buccal and then the epithelial cell from the oral from the sex kit.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so why did you specify which one it came from in your report?
So when the sex assault kit first came in, I need to determine the DNA profile for the victim, whether I have anything to compare to or not. So that's what I did when the sex assault kit came in. I looked at the DNA profile from the oral swab and determined that the epithelial cell fraction could be consistent with the victim. Once the buccal swab from Ms. Hill came in the second round of testing, I did test that buccal swab specifically, and I determined that the DNA profile from the buccal swab of Ms. Hill and the DNA profile that I obtained from the epithelial cell fraction of the oral swab were consistent.
Okay, so you had two for her. Were you just clarifying which one you were using when you reported out the comparison swab for that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the brown stain had nothing to do with a skin cell from Ms. Hill?
It had nothing to do with an epithelial cell fraction of Ms. Hill.
Okay. And an epithelial cell fraction from Ms. Hill was not located in that brown stain?
That's correct.
All right. Ms. Lim also asked you if it was possible that 2 males were present in 6A and 6B. 6A was the brown, 6A and 6B were both brown staining on the shirt.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
All right. When you were talking to us about the contributors, you said that there were that contributor percentage for 6A, Hill was consistent with Hill was 90, consistent with Harvey was 10?
If I can confirm, but I believe that is correct, yes.
Okay. So that's 100% of the mixture.
Yes, that's correct.
So 2 males were not present in that? I mean, is it fair to say that 2 males were not present in that mixture?
Again, I can't answer that with a yes or no. I could just say that the DNA mixture is including at least 1 male.
Okay, so that's kind of, is that how y'all couch that at FDLE?
Yes, yes,
Right.
it is.
It doesn't mean that 2 males were present.
Correct.
Ms. Lim asked you about some things that Detective Gaines or whoever at LCSO was filling out those forms sent to you. Is that something that he just chooses to do, or is that actually in the FDLE submission paperwork?
So in that evidence submission manual that I talked about earlier, it does state that for the case that is coming in, we do need to have some scenario present. Because again, like I said, I could do a whole bunch of different types of testing. And in order to save time, I need to know what type of testing I need to do. And that will be dictated by the case scenario.
And does that case scenario, I mean, does it say, you better find Mr. Harvey's DNA on these items?
No, it does not.
Right. Does the case scenario, I mean, how many sentences are we talking about?
Sometimes it could be as 1 sentence, sometimes it could be 2 or 3 sentences. Sometimes it'll be multiple phone calls that are made between myself or someone else and the agency. So it could be just a little of information to very specific information.
Right. Did the information that was provided to you from Detective Gaines, did it in any way change what your analysis was?
It did not change the analysis. The only way that information is used is to determine what type of testing I need to do on the items of, what kind of screening I need to do on those items of evidence.
Okay. Ms. Lim also asked you about Mr. Moore being referenced as an elimination standard. What does that mean to you, an elimination standard?
So for me, when a standard comes in being labeled as elimination, it means that it could just be used to eliminate someone. They might not be a person of interest or a subject in the case. They might just know that this person could have touched that item, so they want to eliminate them from that item of evidence. Now, whether the standards come in as victim, subject, or elimination, I will always, part of our policies, we will always compare all of the standards in the same way to the DNA profiles that were obtained from the evidence.
Okay, so just because law enforcement couched it or classified it as an elimination standard, did that mean that you decided to automatically exclude Jerry Moore from every single one of your analysis?
No, I compared Mr. Moore the exact same way that I compared Ms. Hill and Mr. Harvey.
The brown staining on the t-shirt Ms. Lim was asking you about and said, well, it could have been from anything. You were trying to explain the presumptive positive test for blood. It has a certain chemical reaction that reacts to something in blood?
Yes.
Okay. So, like, ketchup probably wouldn't have that chemical in it.
So there are some different items that can give us a positive indication. So you brought up ketchup. Actually, tomato is one of those vegetables that could give a positive for that chemical test, which is why we only call it a presumptive test. Okay. Because there's a lot of substances that can react with the test.
Sure. And when you're doing DNA analysis, you're in a lab, and is it fair to say that you're not on the ground investigating?
That's correct. I've never go to scenes at all.
All right. So you don't look at crime scene photos? That's
correct.
All right. And you may not even know, aside from a couple of sentences, what actually happened to the victim, how the victim died, how many times, if the victim was shot, how many times, things like that.
That's correct. That might be information that is not provided to me.
Okay. Can DNA be used as a tool to corroborate certain things?
It can be, yes.
Does DNA always explain everything?
No, it does not.
Right. So if we have a red-brown stain on a shirt, and did it test presumptive positive for blood? I'm sorry, and I said red-brown. I'm sorry, brown.
Yes, the brown stain did give chemical indications for blood.
Okay. If someone was shot with a firearm, would you expect...
Objection, lack of personal knowledge.
Sustain.
Okay. Are you aware if gunshots cause bleeding?
Not my expert. I'm not an expert in that field, but yes, I do believe that some gunshots can cause bleeding.
Okay. Is that a possible?
Sparks, why don't you save that for your summation? Do you have anything this witness can actually testify to factually?
The presumptive positive for blood, you guys don't take that any further.
Typically, no, we do not.
Okay. Nothing further. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You may step down. And let's take a break. Please don't discuss any of the testimony or any of your views on the case. Do any research regarding the case, and we'll see you back here in about 10 or 15 minutes. Anything for the record? Please be seated. All right, we'll be on break.
Hi, Rodrica.
Yes, please.
Are we taking 10 minutes, Judge?
Yep. Do you have a copy of Ms. Hyatt's report you can give me, Ms. Fox?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a copy of Ms. Hyatt's report you can give to me?
Yeah, I don't have it printed. I can.
Email's fine. Yep.
All right, we're back.
All right, please be seated. Let's go back on the record. This is State of Florida versus Christopher Harvey, 2021 CF 2146. Defendant's present with his counsel, all other counsel present. And anything before we bring the jury back in?
Yes, sir, just briefly, Ms. Hyatt, when she was leaving, told me that she thinks she has seen one of the jurors in the back row before. She didn't know a name, she didn't know where from, she just said he looked familiar. And so I just wanted to put that on the record. I know in jury selection, none of them, I don't think any of them said, at least it's on this panel, that they knew anyone from FDLE, so just, I wanted
Did she
to...
give a name or a seat
She
number?
didn't know. She said he was in the back row, male, blue striped shirt with glasses, I think hanging on his shirt collar, and shorter hair.
Short hair. Hair.
Short hair, back row, blue striped shirt with glasses hanging from his. I couldn't think of who it would be, but.
So she didn't point to a seat?
She said she thought it may have been like four or so seats from where she was.
Like glasses, like reading glasses?
She didn't specify. She just said she may have seen him around before and looked familiar, but she didn't know from where, and she didn't know his name, and
Does either side want to inquire any further? Is she still around?
well, I think she probably left the courthouse, but she probably hasn't gotten too far, so I can always request her come back. But I don't wish to inquire any further. She was just, she told me that she was mentioning it because they were required to under FDLE protocol.
Defense, any comment on
Your Honor, I would request that you ask the jury as a whole, anybody on the jury may class.
Do you want to do that or a little bit more non-specific, like if we know we asked you at the beginning, but as witnesses come in, you see anybody you recognize, just let us know. And has anybody recognized anybody so far?
That's acceptable, Judge.
Okay.
No objection.
All right, we'll see that one.
And I'm sorry, maybe I should clarify. Is the bail taxing the jury? Or will you bring them out now?
Well, I thought we were going to bring it up, but now that you say that, there might be some confusion.
Right. I just noticed that he just walked in the jury.
I thought he was going to go get them.
You might.
All right. Ready.
All right, please be seated. So before we call our next witness, I just wanted to make sure that if you all have recognized anybody as we go, any of the witnesses or anything. I know we asked in the beginning, but that's kind of a long list of names and it's kind of hard to catch them all. So if you could let us know if there's somebody you might have recognized as a witness, and we can inquire further individually if that were the situation. But just kind of a poll. Has anybody recognized any of the witnesses so far?
Potentially. I did report it to the bailiff.
Okay. Do you remember which witness?
The first witness, Mr. Cannon.
Mr. Cannon, and
I believe I knew somebody. He looked very familiar. I knew somebody by a different first name in high school, but he did resemble him.
Somebody from high school?
I knew him as Clark Cannon. I don't know if that was the same individual or not, but the similarities were they're there.
You know a lot of people from high school.
Born and raised in Tallahassee.
Okay.
I'm not in contact with him really, probably 50
Okay.
years.
Didn't cause you to look at his testimony one way or the other, or no? All right. Any other inquiry from the parties?
No, sir.
No, Your Honor.
All right. So state if you're ready for your next witness.
Yes, sir. State calls Detective Robert Gaines. Or, I'm sorry, he's sergeant now. They keep changing on me.
Good morning, sir. Can I have you pause right there? You set that binder down. And then just face our clerk, raise your right hand and be sworn.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, and then just have a seat there. And state whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. No, we're not there yet. Sorry, jumping ahead of schedule. Good morning. Could you introduce yourself to us and spell your last name?
Sergeant Robert Gaines, last name Gaines, with the Leon County Sheriff's Office.
And what capacity are you currently working for LCSO?
I currently work in uniform patrol.
As what?
As a uniform patrol sergeant and supervisor.
Can you give the jury an idea of your experience with LCSO and the different roles you've had?
I've started back in 2010 with the Sheriff's Office, where I worked on uniform patrol as a patrol deputy for 2.5 years. After that, I moved on to the traffic unit, where I worked as a traffic deputy for about 4.5 years. After that, I moved on to school resource, where I worked in school resource for a couple years. And then after that, I moved on to criminal investigations, where, excuse me, where I worked in the property crimes unit, vice crimes units, and my last assignment before moving back to patrol as a supervisor was the violent crime special victims unit.
What is the violent crimes special victims unit? Does that require any additional specialized training?
Not specialized training, ma'am.
Okay. Do you go to homicide school or any other types of trainings that help you investigate violent crimes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Can you explain what homicide school is?
It's basically the school that teaches you what to look for in certain instances on scenes and things to do in terms of a homicide investigation.
How long is that course?
I believe that course is a week long.
Right. Do you have any other specialized trainings that you've had that helped you out or aided you in the violent crimes unit?
Traffic unit, I went to traffic homicide investigations that aided me a little bit in homicide investigations, and as well as interview and interrogations.
Okay. Back in August of 2021, what unit were you working with at LCSO?
I was with the violent crime special victims unit.
And if a violent crime happens at a particular given point, is someone in that unit like on call or next up for that particular investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you working as the on-call violent crimes detective on August 14th, 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you assigned this case that we're here for today?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We've talked to a couple of other of the deputies and the crime scene detectives that have helped you. Would you consider homicide investigations and violent crimes investigations, do you work as part of a team, or are you an individual kind of lone ranger?
It's worked as a part of a team.
Right. The first thing I want to talk about is so when items of evidence are submitted to FDOE, do the results come back to you as the lead investigator on the case?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and so are you able to take a look at those results and then do potential further investigative work on the case if it's needed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So yesterday we heard about a latent print that was located on a Lorson 9mm firearm that was recovered at the Botany Drive residence in this case. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and are you familiar with the APHIS system match that was located for an individual named DeAndrew Scott?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did the FDLE report with the latent print match to DeAndrew Scott give you any specific information on how to identify who that DeAndrew Scott was?
Yes, ma'am.
What did it provide you?
And each individual was provided with what we call a SID ID number.
SID?
Yes, ma'am.
Like state identification number?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Were you able to investigate who this DeAndrew Scott might be?
Yes, ma'am.
Was he anyone that had been on your radar for this investigation? Like, his name ever come up from any witnesses or anything?
No, ma'am.
All right. So when you investigated who DeAndrew Scott was, did you find where he was located?
He was currently located in the Florida Department of Corrections.
All right. How long had he been in the Florida Department of Corrections?
He had been there since 2014.
Okay. So 2014, for what?
A murder charge.
Okay. So at the time of August 14th, 2021, when the murder of Rodrica Hill occurred, where was DeAndrew Scott?
He was incarcerated in Florida Department of Corrections.
All right. No prison breaks?
No, ma'am, not to my knowledge.
All right. were you able to eliminate him as a suspect?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to turn your attention to 2954 Cathedral Drive and the scene at that location, which is Ms. Hill's residence. Were you made aware that a Ring video camera was located on the front door or near the front door?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And are you familiar with how Ring cameras work?
A little bit, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you have a Ring camera?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Was this particular Ring video camera at Ms. Hill's residence, was it hardwired into the house?
It's not hardwired into the house. It's attached to the door frame of the residence.
Okay. And I guess my question would be, how is the data of that Ring camera uploaded anywhere?
It's when it's recorded, it goes to, I guess, the Ring company's cloud for retention.
Okay. Were you and the team able to get any video directly from that Ring camera?
When you said, you mean by directly from it?
So, I mean, did that Ring camera have a battery in it?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Was there any kind of internal memory storage?
No, ma'am, not that I know of.
All right. So you had to. Who'd you get the footage from?
We actually sent a search warrant to the Ring company to get the video footage.
And is it your understanding that Ring retains a certain amount of footage on their servers?
Yes, ma'am.
And they do that in the normal course of business?
Yes, ma'am.
When they respond back to a search warrant for any Ring video, how do you tell them what camera you want it from?
The search warrant is for, it just asks for a Ring video camera at a certain address. Then you can be kind of descriptive as where the camera may be located.
Okay. And did they provide you with records for the Ring video camera located at 2954 Cathedral Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Have you had a chance to review the return of those records from Ring?
Yes, ma'am.
And did it include a significant amount of Ring videos, the business records, affidavit, subscriber information, a Ring logs reference document, and then a document including Ring logs?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Have you had a chance to review that?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And is that the complete return provided from Ring?
Yes, ma'am.
Judge, at this time I would move 40A through E into evidence.
Objection.
State's Exhibit 40A through E are admitted.
And I'd also ask, Judge, if you could read Joint Stipulation Number 2.
So members of the jury, same as before, when parties agree that certain facts are true, that is called a stipulation of fact. You must accept stipulated facts as having been proven. However, the significance of these facts, as with all facts, is for you to decide. In this case, the stipulated fact that you must accept as true is the timestamps for the Ring videos in Exhibit 40A, as shown in the Ring video logs, Exhibit 40E, are in UTC time. Go ahead, Steve.
And Detective Gaines, are you familiar with how to convert UTC time to Eastern time in August of 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
And what would we have to do to make it the right timestamp?
There's a 4-hour difference, so the time in UTC would be 4 hours. Subtract 4 hours to get the Eastern Standard Time.
Okay. Permission to publish, Judge?
You may.
I'm going to start with publishing 40D, the logs reference document. So is this something provided by Ring that explains what each row is going to talk about in the logs.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I'm now publishing 40E, the logs. Okay, so what do we have in row A, or column A, not row, sorry.
Column A would be the date in which the footage was recorded.
All right, what about column B?
Column B would be the time, and that time would be in UTC.
All right, so to get an accurate timestamp, we'd have to do -4.
Yes, ma'am.
And then that would give us the time. All right. Column C, do you know what that is?
I'm not 100% sure what that would be. It's just
says
loaded as void.
Void, okay. What about number 4, which is column D?
It's the particular ID number that's assigned to the footage.
Okay. Are these in any kind of particular sequential order that you can tell, or it seems like a bunch of random numbers?
Yes, there's no particular order, it's a bunch of numbers.
That's unfortunate for us. So I'm going to publish what 40A looks like, which is the videos themselves. So if we want to know what the timestamp of this first video is, what's the ID number? I guess can you look at the last 4? 35784?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, I guess that's the last 5. We would have to go to the log to see the timestamp of that video. Right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And so the timestamp of the first video is what after it's converted?
It would be 1:18
All right. And that would be 1:18 a.m.
a.m. Yes, ma'am.
on August 13th, 2021.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So that was that the first video that Ring provided that they still had retained?
I'm sorry.
Was that the first, I guess the oldest video that Ring had provided that they had still retained in their cloud?
I believe that's the video they provided based on what we exported in the search warrant.
Right. Oh, okay. All right. So what was the last video that Ring had retained?
The last video would be August 14th, 2021 at, let's see, 4:26 p.m.
AM or PM?
I'm sorry, a.m.
Okay. So are these timestamps in military time?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And is that how you determine whether it's AM or PM?
Yes, ma'am.
So since it's 9:26:12 AM in military time, we would subtract 4 hours, and that would give us,
I'm sorry, 5:26 a.m. That would give us 5:26 a.m. in 12 seconds.
5:26 a.m. So our last video that we have is 5:26 a.m. on August 14th.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Do the actual Ring videos themselves have date and timestamps on them?
No, ma'am.
Great. So they made it really easy for us. Going to publish state C, the account information. is 40C. What is the account information for the Ring camera at 2954 Cathedral Drive?
It's showing that the account was created on August 1st, 2020 at 9:40 a.m. It's showing that the full name of the account holder would be Chris Harvey, and it's showing a user ID with a numeric number, and it's showing the ID. The email will be c.harvey34550@gmail.com, and it shows some type of payment that was made with a credit card, with a Visa, with some numbers that would be 600.
What about device information?
The device ID is showing that it's 489-33640, with the MAC ID being 54E01915C20F, and it's showing the type would be a doorbell scallop light, and the description that it was assigned would be the front door at 2954 Cathedral Drive.
Okay. Are all of the videos that Ring provided from this particular doorbell at 2954 Cathedral Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
To show you a couple of the videos. Have you gone through, in total, there's 105 Ring videos. Does that sound right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I can show you. Do you want me to show you so you can confirm? Or?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So, 105 items.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Have you gone through all of these videos?
Yes, ma'am.
And how does Ring video work? Are you familiar? We previously heard from the neighbors that have a camera that's a continuous monitoring camera. Were you familiar with that? With Ms. Williams' camera that was next door?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Does Ring differ from that?
Yes, ma'am.
How?
Ring is it's called a motion event. Basically, when it senses maybe some type of motion, that's when it triggers to record for a certain amount of time, whether it be 30 seconds or a minute.
Okay.
But it's recording only a certain section before it stops recording.
In your experience with Ring, does sometimes it miss certain events?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you know why?
I don't know why that is.
All right. Was that consistent with some of these videos where you might get somebody, walking around the house and then the car's gone, but you don't actually see the car leaving?
Yes, ma'am.
Things like that? Okay. Are you familiar with, in the Ring, how you take a battery out?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And are you familiar with it as it relates to the model that was located at the Cathedral Drive home?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how do you remove a battery from that model?
If you have the retention, there's a cover on the front of the actual Ring doorbell itself, and there's a screw that retains the cover on there so no one can actually take it out and take the battery out themselves. In order to take that out, you have to use the screwdriver that's provided by Ring and take the screw out. You can flip the cover off, and then there's a silver tab on the battery that releases the battery from the actual camera.
All right. And what would be the point? Why would you take a battery out of a Ring?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Sustain.
Okay. Do you have a Ring?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Does the Ring battery stay charged 100% of the time?
No, ma'am.
Okay, how do you charge a ring battery?
You would have to take the battery out and place it on the charger.
All right, and there's a charger that comes, I guess, with it when you buy it?
Yes, ma'am.
And you mentioned a screwdriver is a ring-specific screwdriver, so it's not like a flathead or Phillips head or something like that?
No, ma'am.
Are you familiar, as far as a cloud-based ring goes, where it's battery powered, if there's no battery in the ring, is it able to upload videos or record videos?
Objection under lack of personal knowledge.
Overruled. Go ahead.
You can answer.
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Sure. So in a ring like you have and like is in this case, are you familiar with what would happen if you took a battery out of the ring? Is it still able to record videos after that?
No, ma'am.
Okay. No, it's not.
No, ma'am. It's not recorded.
So I want to show a couple videos. And does the ring it have audio as well?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So get it to work. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to show you ending in 08424. And if we look at our ring logs, what time and date are we looking at?
Looks like we're looking at August 13th, 2021, and that would be, looks like 6:19 p.m. 6:19 p.m.
Okay, so we subtract 4 from 2319.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, take that back. It's 11, so minus 4 would be 7:19 p.m.
All right, 7:19 p.m. local time. Are you familiar from your investigation with the vehicle that Mr. Harvey was driving on August 13th and August 14th, 2021?
Yes, ma'am.
And what vehicle was that?
That would be a white Chevrolet pickup dually type truck.
Okay. Was it consistent with the one that we see in this video, the truck that was ultimately located at the Cathedral Drive residence?
It looks to be.
Okay. Going to show you video. Six one 46184. We're going to find that one later because it's all the numbers are running together. Let's look at later in the evening. So obviously the one we just looked at was during the daytime, or at least when it was still light out. The video of the truck, it was still light outside?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I want to turn your attention to earlier in the morning. I'm sorry, later that night. So looking at video ending in, I don't know. Ending in 9992. Okay. What time was that video at?
It would be 10:03 p.m.
Okay. I'm going to move forward to, and let me ask you, from looking at all of these videos, are a lot of these videos like nothing happens? Maybe a car is driving by on the Cathedral Drive road, and so the motion activation comes up, but nothing actually is happening at the house?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Objection, just for format, I don't know what video is being shown.
56232.
Thank you. Continue, please.
So what time was that video we just watched of Miss Hill arriving back home?
It would be 2:16 a.m.
On August 14th.
August 14th, yes, ma'am.
Right. I'm going to go to the next video, which ends in 1992. And what time is that going to be? Just a few minutes later?
That is 2:25 a.m.
Right, and then the next one after that.
2:27 a.m.
Okay, so I'm going to publish 1992, which is at 2:25 a.m. What does Miss Hill appear to be doing in that video?
Taking some clothing and putting her in her car.
All right. Moving on to the next video at 2:27 a.m. and this is video 19400. And then I'm going to go to the next video, which you said was at 2:32 a.m. Video 2232. Okay. Move on to the next video, which is 7112. What time is this video going to be at?
That's 3:10 a.m.
Okay, so by 3:10 a.m., Miss Hill's vehicle is left.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Was there a video that shows her actually getting in the car and leaving?
No, ma'am.
The next video, what time is that going to be at?
At 4:56 a.m.
It's going to be 53192. Is that Miss Hill's vehicle arriving back at the Cathedral residence?
Yes, ma'am. Appears to be.
And that's 4:56 a.m.?
Yes,
Or,
ma'am.
okay. Is there a video that shows her getting out of the car and coming inside?
No, ma'am.
And the last video, what time is the last video at?
5:26 a.m.
What's in the bottom left corner of the screen by Miss Hill's vehicle? Are you able to determine what if anything, that is?
No, not from this video, though.
Okay. Is there some type of movement going on?
Yes, ma'am. It appears to be a movement. Appears that we can't make out what, but it appears to be like a person movement.
did you ask, and if you need to refer to your report for your recollection, you can, what was the date and time range you gave Ring of the videos that you wanted?
I'll refer to. I'm sorry, I don't seem to have that particular search warrant from which I was sent to Ring. So I'm not 100% sure what time frame without looking at the actual subpoena.
Can I approach for the copy of the search warrant? To refresh his recollection. What did you request from Ring in terms of the time period of the videos that you wanted?
The time frame that was requested was August 13th from midnight. It would be 12 a.m. to August 14th, midnight.
Midnight or longer? You need to see it again?
Yes, ma'am. One more time.
I approach.
Ma'am.
So August 14th, yes, ma'am. 1400 would be 2 p.m.
So you requested August 13th at midnight through August 14th at 2 p.m. We've already looked at some videos from August 13th at 10 p.m. though, so I guess, did they give you more than what you asked for?
Well, sorry, what was your question again?
So earlier we looked at a video that was August 13th at 10 p.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So they gave you more than what you asked for.
Yes, ma'am.
But you asked for it to go through August 14th at 2 p.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. The last video that we have was that 5:26 a.m. video.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So there were no other videos after 5:26 a.m.
No, ma'am.
Were you made aware of some neighbor surveillance video at 2828 Cathedral Drive during the course of your investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
And was that surveillance video obtained?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was from the Williams residence?
Yes, ma'am.
And that is next door to Miss Hill's house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Have you had a chance to review each of those videos?
Yes, ma'am.
And Exhibit 39 has already been admitted into evidence. Does 46 videos sound about right?
Yes,
I
ma'am.
can show you exhibit. "46 videos from the Williams residence."
Yes, ma'am.
As opposed to Ring, the Williams residence was the continuous monitoring.
Yes, ma'am.
So were these, how big of chunks are these videos?
Now, very large. They're large chunks of it because they're continuously recording.
Okay. And did these videos have a date and time stamp on them?
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yes.
Do we have to do any adjustments for this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
With looking at the video from the time we were actually on scene, we realized that the time is an hour. There's an hour difference.
I need to do that. All right. So if this video is 5:31 a.m., it would actually be 4:31 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to publish video number 2. Were you able to compare from the Ring videos where you saw the victim's vehicle pulling in and this video?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Which video is better?
The Ring video.
All right. So if we're at 3:56 on the video, it's actually 4:56 a.m. local time.
Refer to. Yes, ma'am. That would be 4:56 a.m.
Are you aware of what light we're seeing, what the source of this light source in the upper right-hand corner?
Determined that would be a light from the side view mirror of the vehicle.
Of whose vehicle?
Mrs. Hill's vehicle.
Is there another light source that has appeared?
Yeah, it appears to be like a cell phone light.
Does the passenger door of this vehicle ever open?
No, ma'am.
Gonna scroll through to the end of this video. Do any other vehicles for this video enter the residence or the driveway?
No, ma'am.
And so that ends at about
That would be 4:59.
4:59 a.m. All right. Okay. So I'm going to the next video, video number 3. And we pick up where we left off at 4:59 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Now scroll forward. Still no vehicles have come into the driveway or the front of the residence?
No, ma'am.
All right, see some headlights, so I'm going to stop. At about 4:03 a.m. on the video, which would be 5:03 a.m. in local time. I'm going to pause the video at 5:04 a.m. local time. Did you recognize this truck that's pulled in?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. How would you describe this truck?
That was the white dually truck.
Okay. That belonged to whom?
Mr. Harvey.
Is that the same location you guys found it when you arrived on scene at 1 or 2 o'clock then later that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm pausing the video at about 4:04:11 a.m., which is 5:04:11 a.m. What happens to this truck?
The truck is basically the looks like the driver's side door opens up and the dome light of the vehicle comes on.
Are you able to tell if there's an individual inside that truck?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Where would you look to see that person?
You said where?
Yes. Is that where my cursor is?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know what happened, why the dome light went off?
The driver's side door was the door of the vehicle was closed.
Scroll forward until we've got some movement again. Looks like we got some headlights, so it's at 5 minutes, 19 seconds in the video. So just a passing by car.
Yes, ma'am.
Start it back around 7 minutes, 55 seconds. What happens at around 5:07:44 a.m.? I'm using the correct local time, not the video time.
The door of the vehicle opens up and the individual goes inside the vehicle.
Okay. At 5:08:18 a.m., what happens?
The inside light of the vehicle turns off.
I'm gonna fast forward. You see some lights, so I'm gonna stop. That's about 5:09:46 a.m. Just another vehicle passing by on the main street.
Yes, ma'am.
Keep scrolling. So this video block ends at 5:12 and 10 seconds a.m. once you convert it.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to go to the next video, which is going to be video number 4. Okay, so again, we pick up where we left off, 5:12:14 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, scroll through this. Right. No movement, no new cars, nothing like that in this video number 4.
No, ma'am.
All right, and that ends at what time?
5:24 a.m.
I'm going to go to the next video, video 5. And we pick up where we left off at 5:24 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Fast forward. To around 5:25 a.m. What happens at around 5:25:51 a.m.?
A vehicle, the dome light of the vehicle comes on and appears to be someone near the driver's side door of the vehicle.
All right. Is there movement back at the truck again?
Yes, ma'am.
It's 5:26:21 a.m. The lights that we see, is that another vehicle passing by?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to ask you going back to 5:26 a.m. Was that consistent with the ring video that we saw? There was a ring video that alerted movement at 5:26 a.m. or around there.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Is there some type of light source that is around Miss Hill's car at that point in time or near the porch?
Not that I can follow, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to start playing around 5:30, 20 seconds. What do we see around the truck at around, now I paused it, 5:30, 30 seconds?
I'm sorry.
What, is there anything that's going on with the truck at that time?
Yes, ma'am. There's an individual inside the truck. Appears to be doing something in the center area of the truck.
Right. At 5:32:38, what occurs at the truck?
The inside vehicle light, dome light, turns off.
Is there another car driving by again around 5:33:23?
Yes, ma'am.
There's some type of flash that in the upper right-hand corner.
Yes, ma'am. Appears to be.
Where is that occurring, that flash of light that's kind of flickering?
That would be, looks like the front of the Miss Hill's vehicle.
All right, I'm gonna stop at 5:34:46 a.m. and play it. Would you know what this light source is from over here?
I believe that's a vehicle that's going to pass.
Okay. Can you tell if there's any movement at the stairs to the cathedral residence?
From this, no, I can't tell if there's movement at the stairs. It's in the area of where the stairs may be, but I don't know exactly if it's the stairs or not.
Okay. I'm kind of scrolling forward and backward. What do you see in the?
There looks like a light source of some type going up where the stairs would be.
Objection on it. This is speculation.
It's the same.
Is there a light at 5:35:48 in that same area by Miss Hill's vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Fox, do you think you'd be at a good stopping point for lunch here?
If we can go for a couple more minutes, and we're almost done with the video. All right. And at 5:35:56, what happens? I mean, do you see movement?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Where?
Inside the vehicle, going to the driver's compartment.
And around 5:36:20, what happens to that vehicle, the truck?
The vehicle is backing up and leaving the residence.
Have you gone through each of the videos after that truck leaves?
Yes, ma'am.
Does any new vehicle arrive?
No, ma'am.
Does Miss Hill's vehicle ever leave?
No, ma'am.
I go to video 44. And now, are we looking at the daytime?
Yes, ma'am.
And what time are we looking at?
We're looking at 1:06 p.m.
On August 14th still?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Miss Hill's vehicle still there?
Yes, ma'am.
What vehicles is the vehicle going to be pulling in?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you able to tell what happens to Miss Hill's vehicle at about 1:06:51 p.m.?
The trunk of the vehicle opens up.
Objection, Your Honor. Let's see that one.
Overall.
All right, and what vehicle pulls in to the top of that driveway?
Mr. Harvey's vehicle.
At 1:08:20-ish, what happens?
Can I see the footage again?
passenger door opening now?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you able to see a second individual walking from the driver's side of the truck?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's around 1:11 p.m.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a good stopping place, Judge.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, please don't discuss any of the testimony that's been given or any of your thoughts or opinions on the case. Don't do any research regarding the case. We'll take a hour lunch break. If you could be back here at 1:45, and we'll start back then. Thank you. All right, please be seated. Anything for the record?
Yes, sir.
Defense? Anything?
Judge, I really want to follow back up on what we talked to the jury about, whether they were witnesses. Did it relate to you that the jury knows everybody from high school knew Officer Connor?
Yeah, the bailiff did tell me. I forgot to tell you guys, but it was the same thing he said just now.
Okay.
Or,
I just wanted to put that on the record. When was that told to the bailiff?
that was like the first witness, so that would have been the Tuesday.
So that was Tuesday, you told right after that witness?
Near that, I don't know when. Whenever the first break probably was, I don't know.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yes, sir. I just need to approach the exhibit.
Okay. So we'll be off record.
What time would you like us back, Judge?
A few minutes before.
Before 1:45?
Yep.
Okay.